back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for all staying tuned to the second hour of the show. We're still talking to Derrel Sims. In this hour, we're going to be speaking to him about hypnotherapy, the uses, the benefits, and some of the interesting things that you can do with it. But don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com. That's SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics, AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com. And please do check out the Just Energy Radio webpage to sign up for our newsletter or check out our almost 5 years' worth of archives. Hey, Derrel, it's been a long time.
Yeah, I hadn't heard from you in a long time.
That's right. Okay, so I need you to take off the handwriting analysis hat and put on the hypnotherapy hat.
My voice has changed, as you can hear.
Ah, yes. I'm very tired.
Yes. The show is now over, and you enjoyed it perfectly.
Yeah. In your bio, it says that you're a certified hypnotic anesthesia therapist, which is kind of an interesting title. I mean, I've heard that people specialize in, like, forensic hypnosis, which I'm not really sure what that exactly means, but I've never heard someone being an anesthesia therapist. What? Like, you can use hypnotherapy to knock people out and then do surgery? Is that what you're trying to tell me there?
That's pretty much it. And I got a funny story for you. We were doing a alien implant removal in a surgical procedure in California, and was doing it on a TV program. And of course, the TV show required that we have so much overkill there you couldn't even believe it. We had to have an anesthesiologist, an MD anesthesiologist present, just in case. And all this guy was getting was a little tiny object removed from his thumb under the skin, and they wanted an anesthesiologist present. So I thought, good night, these people are off the charts nuts. So anyway, I thought, well, okay. And anyway, the anesthesiologist was following me around. She got in my face and said, "Now, who the heck do you think you are?" And I said, "I beg your pardon." And she says, you think claim to be a hypnotic anesthesiologist, blah, 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 anesthesiotherapist? And I said, yes, ma'am. And I said, and? She says, well, I'm an anesthesiologist. And I said, I know exactly what you are. I said, we hired you. And I said, and she just kept getting real snippy. So finally I said, look, I pay your salary. You do what I tell you to do, and you just follow my cue and watch what I do. You'll find that we don't need you for anything anyway. You're just here for trappings. That's all. So pay attention, and you might even learn something. And once I got right back in her face, she looked at me and said, "Oh God, this is so wonderful." She says, "I'm a hypnotist myself, and I've always wanted to see hypnotic anesthesia. I've never seen it before." And I said, "Well, you're going to enjoy it." I said, "You just watch and pay attention." I said, "I'll show you some things you're never going to see probably again." Anyway, long story short is I put the young man in a deep trance just before he went into surgery. And, of course, the anesthesiologist there with all her equipment and everything. And the fact is that people I do this with in surgery for whatever reason, for dental work or anything, it doesn't make any difference, they heal up 3 to 5 times faster, and they don't have to fill out one of those forms that says, when the anesthesia forms, it says you could die and you may experience some pretty awful side effects from the anesthesia. That's pretty standard. I mean, you're going to fill that out if you're going to go through surgery. And I know because I've been in surgery before. And these are the normal forms that you fill out as a result. So the bottom line is you don't have to fill any of those out when I'm working with you because it's just that simple. And the individuals themselves that go through this heal up 3 to 5 times faster, as I've mentioned. And if they're good candidates for this, they do extremely well. And I can just give you example after example after example, football players and others, and even a doctor one time we were going to Japan, and in this case, I'd missed my flight because I forgot. We all got to the flight desk, and the lady looked at my passport and says, "Mr. Sims," says, "this just doesn't look like you." And I looked, and it was my wife's passport. I said, "Oops." He said, "You can't go to Japan without your passport." So I missed the flight and had to wait there the next day to get my passport flown to me. And anyway, so I got there the next day, got to Japan the next night, and anyway, the doctor that went with me was in serious agony, and the Japanese delegation met me at 1 o'clock in the morning when I got off the train, and they said, "Mr. Sim, this doctor, we think maybe he died." And I said, "What?" He says, "He's very, very sick, and nobody can do anything for him, and we don't know what to do." And they're all freaked out. You know, he's going to have a dead body the next morning, you know. So I went in and I talked to him. And I said, "What's going on?" He was rolling around on the bed. His stomach was killing him. And he said, "Oh, God," he said, "you got to help me. You got to do your magic on me." He said, "I'm dying here, moaning. Please, please help me." And so I talked to him for a few moments and asked him a couple of questions. And, of course, the pain got worse, which was what I wanted to know, because people are already in hypnosis when they're in pain. See, hypnosis is focused attention, period. It's not some magical something. It is focused attention, period. Good or bad, it's focused attention. Well, he was in pain. Of course, I just increased the pain by suggestion. What does that mean? I hadn't put him in hypnosis yet. He's already in hypnosis. When I made the suggestion, his pain got worse, which was good. Now, if I can make his pain worse, what can I also do?
Make it better.
Make his pain less, and I did. But the fact is that most people are negative, and that's horrible, but that's the truth. And so increasing it, making it worse is better. And when you make it worse, then they realize things can get a lot worse. And would you like me to make it better? Well, of course, the answer is please, 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 and I did. Long story short, with this individual is he went into a deep sleep, and for the next 30 minutes, I put him in a state called Esdale. Esdale is a state used for what we refer to as, some people in hypnotherapy call it the coma. It's a state in which you will go into a catatonic state, and you'll just sit there or lie there or whatever. You can even stand there, and whatever the position they're in, and lying is better. And in his case, it was. And he would literally feel nothing, and in this catatonic state. And next morning, of course, he woke up fine and had no pain whatsoever, and he's jumping around and made everybody mad because he was so happy that he was cured and all that and healed and whatever. He was pretty obnoxious about it. But he was very happy about it. But the point was that he was already in hypnosis in his great pain. All I did was simply continue it and then put him in this Esdale state. Now, your audience might ask, how do you know a person's in a various different state of hypnosis? These are all testable states. A testable state for Esdale as an example, and that you want to use this for surgery, obviously, rather than localize some area and remove the, deaden the area, so to speak. This catatonic state is better because they don't know anything. They don't care about anything is what it is. They love the state and they love it there, and they're just doing something else and they don't care. And you can carve on them, and you literally, there are people who have gone through heart surgery with this under hypnosis as well. And some of them were even singing while it was going on. Those are just different aspects of it. One of the ways you test for catatonic state, the Esdale state, is, and somebody asked me this when I put a young girl came into our home one night. She'd injured her knee really bad, and they carried her in. Said, "Can you please help her?" And I said, "Sure." And, of course, naturally I started on making it worse, and she was screaming, and they thought that was pretty cruel, and it actually wasn't. It's part of the technique. I said, "You want me to make it all go away?" And she said, "Oh, God, please." And I said, "Okay." And then I put her in this catatonic state, and they said, "Well, how do we know that she's in that state?" And I said, "What's this?" And I moved her arms and I moved her arms with no suggestion, and wherever you put their arms, legs, or anything, they stay that way until they come out of that state. They may be sitting there for hours with their arms over their head, and they will not know, nor will they care. But that's one of the ways you test for catatonic state, or Esdale state as we refer to it.
Can everyone be hypnotized, or are there some people that are more prone to hypnosis versus other people?
Everybody's hypnotized at least twice every day. Everybody. Anybody ever remember ever having a dream in their life, and you wake up and you wish you could just kind of stay in that state just for a few more minutes and just finish the dream and have that wonderful, you're coming out of hypnosis. That's what's happening. You're waking, you're coming out of the hypnotic state. The state of hypnagogic and hypnoproponic states are when you just go into sleep, and it's when you get in that twilight zone, and it's really wonderful, and then you fall into a deep, just before you fall into that deep sleep, you're extremely suggestible. Some people leave the TV going, or they leave the radio going, and they wake up the next day singing the song, and they can't figure out why they can't get the song out of their brain. Because you heard it when you were in that state. It was suggestible, you liked it, and so you took the suggestion, and you're singing it all day the next day. Or you're buying certain products, you don't know why you go to the store and you keep buying the same products over and over. The TV's been doing that to you for years. They do. They spent $8 million on a study to know exactly what you're doing in your home at certain times, and even during football games where you would be in the house. So that's why they turned the volume up on your advertisements. So they knew you were.
I think they made a law, though, that they can't do that anymore, because that was really annoying. You're watching TV, and we kind of run it a little loud at our house anyway, and then the commercial would come on, and it'd be like, bah! Way too loud. There's a belief that people have that when you go under hypnosis that you talked about, this comatose state, and that's where they are, and then they're unconscious, and then basically, they can do whatever they want to you. Is that a true statement, or is there any level of control that the client, the hypnotized person has?
You're wise in the suggestion. To begin with, you normally will not do things under hypnosis that you would not normally do in your normal living life state. For instance, people get on. They go into. And let me give you a perfect, kind of a UFO example of hypnosis and what we did. And this actually happened in California at a presentation I was doing on the difference between memory and recall. Memory, is very obvious. That's real, actual memory. Recall is what happens that we experience, but is not necessarily, quote unquote, our real memory. Example. In this case, I brought a hypnotist up, and there were therapists present, and a psychiatrist, and all kinds of people, and UFO folks as well, at this presentation. And a lady came up, this hypnotist, and I said, "Do you mind if I hypnotize you?" And she said, "Of course, go ahead." And I said, "We're just going to have a little fun here." And so I did a stage hypnosis show with her. And in this stage hypnosis show, I had her on a bus, and the window was down, and it was freezing, and it was raining inside the bus. She was shaking and cold and everything. And then I had it, then all of a sudden it got hot and sunburning down on her. She had a sunburn, and she was, "Oh, God, it's hot in here, I'm dying," And it was, everybody was laughing and laughing and laughing, and her riding down this bumpy old road in this bumpy old bus and so on, and she's bouncing all over the chair. And, of course, she's not on a bus. She's simply in hypnosis. And I told everybody, and the reason I did that was to show you that is, in fact, not memory. And I brought her out of hypnosis, and I said, "So how did you enjoy this?" She said, "Oh, that was a lot of fun." And I said, "What did you enjoy about it most?" She said, "Well, the driver had real stubby little hair, and he was weird looking and everything." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, young lady," I said, "I never described the driver at all." I said, "You see, you configured that in your own brain. That's called recall, not memory. The alien uses the same thing on abductees, and he creates a false memory syndrome inside people's heads, making them think that the event often didn't even occur or couldn't have occurred because he re-identified himself instead of the small gray being there as a 3-foot owl with large black eyes, or a wolf, or some other imagery that simply that just couldn't have happened, so therefore you will convince yourself it didn't happen. So he creates a recall memory for you rather than real memory. When I come along and work with people, I did get past the screen memory, so to speak, and get to the real memory, and people are absolutely stunned when they realize, oh, my God, I remember everything. Wow.
I guess I'm a little confused. I have been led to believe that the majority of cases, especially recently, have been people being abducted from their room because they were sleeping. So why would you need an owl memory or some other thing memory if you're supposed to be sleeping?
All right, let's take my own case, 1952, little boy laying in my bed. All of a sudden I wake up and I see a white entity walking toward the wall away from me. Now, I can't figure out, first of all, who it is in my room and why they don't have any clothes on, and are long, tall, and skinny with a large bulbous head, and I think to myself, who is that? What is that? And it turns around because it can hear me thinking, and it realizes it's made a mistake. I'm supposed to be asleep and not to remember anything. Now he's got a problem. I'm remembering the event. In fact, I'm standing there, I'm laying in bed, sitting up in bed looking at him, and I'm wondering, I'm freaking out, so I'm figuring out, what is that guy? Why is he walking toward the wall? I didn't know he was going to walk through the wall. I didn't know that. So in this case, my memory's activated simply because I woke up. Now, at this time, he realizes he's got to change my consciousness or do something different with me. So at that point, I'm not paralyzed, I'm not scared, I'm not anything. He does something in himself, and all of a sudden I become instantly paralyzed and with the most horrific fear that I've ever experienced ever in my entire life. And now, I wasn't paralyzed or scared before, but that was his control mechanism. So I fell back against the bed, and he started coming toward me, and he's going to get that large black eye right next to my eye so he can reprogram me and give me the screensaver of a bad dream that I'm going to have so that I won't remember the real event. And I pushed so hard against my little tiny bed that the bed parted from the wall, and I fell down between the V of the wall and the bed, wrapped up in all this cover because it's wintertime, and it was every kid's little nightmare. The entity gets on the other side of the bed, lifts up the cover, and pulls his large bulbous head under the bed right next to my face. And he tries to change the image of himself into that of a clown. He wants me to remember him as a clown in a bad dream that I had as a clown. And I kept shaking my little head back and forth, no, 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 no. I wanted to remember him for what he was, not for what he intended for me to think he was. Many abductees have clown phobias and don't know why. And even Spielberg's movie, the one they did, the series, the clown shows up over and over and over. Guess where he got the information? Right from our research.
That was a really creepy clown. I didn't like clowns after that movie.
That's the whole point. It's to give you the imagery of a false memory, that you had a bad, bad dream. And so when you tell your parents, I had a bad, bad dream of a clown, well, obviously that's not true. But the issue was, what you had was a real experience, but the screensaver, in fact, isn't true, and it's to convince you that something else happened in the event, that it was a dream or that you went through the school of higher consciousness or whatever. But the fact is, in most cases, these people have been hoodwinked.
In your case or other cases that you've worked with people, have you found that many people have conscious recall, or do most people have other things going on and then through regression find out that they've actually have had an abduction experience?
Most people don't remember they only remember pieces or little. There are things we refer to as memory markers that show up. In other words, when people come to me, they'll say, I don't know why, but I have this horrific fear of going down a certain stretch of road. Or I have this terrible fear of clowns, and I've seen this over and over. Or I have this terrible fear, and I don't know why, of some particular imagery, and they have no idea why. And they'll come in and say, would you work with me and try to find out what this is? Usually they don't know it's alien-related. I often do, but I won't say anything because I don't want to influence them in any way. And after you work with them for a little bit, when, for instance, like, and let's go back to this story where I'm working with the hypnotist, and I show everybody in the room. I said, this is an illustration. The hypnotist was doing this little fun thing called a stage show with the hypnotist here who's volunteered for us. That's recall. That's not real memory. She never left the place. There was no bus. There was no driver. There was no anything. Everybody said, yay, yay, we get it, and they all laugh, and she sits down. I thank her. Then I brought a lady back from the back of the room. I said, this is a lady I've not worked with before. I'm not going to hypnotize her. I'm going to ask her some questions because she's had a profound experience with what some people refer to as a Nordic alien being. And I sat her down and I said, have I ever worked with you before? No. You ever met me before? No. And I said, okay. And so we've had no contact. She's none whatsoever. I said, okay. I said, I want to ask you a few questions about this Nordic being or this blonde-haired guy that you just seem to have a lot of affinity for. And she just said, he's really wonderful. And I said, okay. And I said, tell me a little bit about him. She told me about his first event and how wonderful he was and blah, blah, blah. And, I mean, it was just accolades of how incredible and how wonderful and how sweet and gentle, and she could hardly wait to see him again and all these wonderful things. And I said, okay. And I said, if you don't mind, I said, now all these are positive, powerful experiences for you. She said, absolutely, I've never had a negative experience. I said, I think that's wonderful, and I think that's incredible that you're so truthful and that you're so cognizant of your event, and you remember all this totally. And she said, absolutely, never been hypnotized, never. And I said, okay. But I still know that that's a screen memory. I already know that.
Did you ever hypnotize her?
People worldwide not know this.
Did you hypnotize her?
No,
in cases like that. In cases like that, let me ask this question. In cases like that, have you found that the happy, happy, joy, joy is really covering up things that are, I'll say, much uglier?
It was in this case, and I asked her, I said, if you don't mind, I'm going to touch you on the finger right there, and I'm going to ask you to go right back to the very first time you ever met this wonderful man, alien, or whatever he is. And she says, oh, okay. I said, I don't want you to remember, I don't want you to think about it, I just want you to feel it. And she said, oh, okay. And she did, and I intensified it and everything, and she started screaming to the height of her voice and crying insatiably. That was her true first event. These are all screen memories. It's to cover up what really happened. There was no Mr. Wonderful. That's the programming. That's the real memory. I always use the statement, is it memory or Memorex? Memorex is the recall stuff. That's recall. That's not real memory. And when she accessed that screaming and everything, your body remembers all this stuff. It remembers everything.
But there are people, especially from the, I'm going to say, 50s and 60s, who had experiences, and I'm going to say with the Nordics, with the blonde hair, white-skinned ETs that reported, the reports have come back, and I mean, granted, they're really old, that they were positive experiences. And so you think that that race of beings is actually blowing smoke at us, or were at that point in time?
They were and always have been. The fact is, the alien has never told the truth to any race of people that they've ever showed up to, whether it doesn't matter what religions, what cultures, whether Islamic. In Islamic, the alien is referred to as the jinn. When you go to Ireland, they're the wee folk, the fairy folk of Ireland, and they're not really friendly people either, because if you don't do the right thing, or the little fairy folk don't like you, the little people, they may not bring you back. See, it's not like the storybooks that we have here in America. You go to Ireland, it's a little different story. And in every culture they've been in, I mean every culture, from the ancient Sumerians, Warkans, it doesn't matter who they were, anyone in history, what you find is a consistency of confabulation and lying. that they, in fact, have told whoppers to every generation, to every culture, everywhere. They've identified themselves as all kinds of things, aliens. Now, in the last days now here are enlightened days, so to speak. We all think we're so smart because we're not dragging a club behind us with long hair and a hide jerked over our back. We're wandering around with a briefcase and an iPad thinking we're a heck of a lot smarter. So now we've renamed them from the jinn or the fairy folk to the alien. What makes you think that they are the alien if they weren't any of that before?
That's what I think.
It's highly likely they are whoever they were in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And they still are.
In your experience, okay, I mean, there is a lot of talk, the Nordics, the Greys, the Palladians, the Reptilian. I mean, there's a million freaking aliens all running around out there. In your experience in working with people, how many different, and I'm going to say cultures or races, have you personally interacted with people who have had abduction experiences? I think that makes
I've worked with 1,000 people worldwide, over 1,000 cases, and generally speaking, you're looking at 7 different types of entities. The little gray guy that stands about 2.5, 3 foot tall, he's got an IQ of about 80. He's not very smart. He's got an IQ literally of a moron. Then you've got another alien entity taller than him who looks just like him that some people refer to as the doctor. If something medical-like is going to happen, he's going to do it. The doctor type, that guy has got an IQ of about 150, 160. A really sharp guy. Then you've got a mantis-like being who is 6.5, 7 foot tall, and his IQ is about 170, 180. He's really intelligent. Then you've got this human-like being called a Nordic, but they're different colored-haired ones. They're red-haired. The American Indians, several hundred years ago, called them the Sasquatches, the red-haired ones. That's before Columbus and these guys got here. And they were already manifesting to the American Indians then, especially in the North and West. But then you've got another one referred to as some people as a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, and he is a simian-type being, and he sometimes shows up in abduction accounts as well. My point is, all of these guys, what you're looking at is not 7 races of aliens, but 7 different models, like going to a car factory and looking at 7 different Chevrolets. They're all made by the same group. Each one of these guys are not aliens, in my opinion. I don't think anybody's ever met an alien, including me. What I met was something designed and genetically engineered, which is referred to as a transgenic. The DNA was taken from this planet and taken to, in my opinion, a craft, and we've actually got some NASA footage of some of these craft, several thousand miles long, in our neighborhood, in our solar system. And these craft are where the genetic engineering goes on. They didn't come here looking like mantis beings and things like that. They came here and got the DNA and did the transgenics on board those craft. And these models that we're now seeing that you refer to as aliens, and most people refer to as an alien, in fact are not alien at all. They are simply a transgenic being designed to interact with human beings for the purpose of creating the imagery of a quote-unquote alien from another world.
But who's running these ships?
Thank you. That's really the big question. Big question, after all. The first hints, you have to go back in history to actually find this stuff in some of the ancient Vedic literature, the Rig Veda and the Mahabharata, and ancient Sumerian, Warkan, Hebrew, other literature, and you will find huge consistencies with the stories, with the historical stories. And what you will find is that the entities the Sitchin referred to them as the Anunnaki who came down from heaven. Well, the only problem is Sitchin either didn't know Hebrew very well or mistranslated it on purpose. Now, I'm not sure which the problem was, because we talked to him and his staff about it, and they never would come on TV or radio and with a proctor and one of my Ugaritic and Sumerian scholars to describe why he couldn't figure out what the true Hebrew actually said, and it's real simple to understand. The Anunnaki didn't come down from heaven. They were kicked out of heaven. That's consistent with the biblical view of fallen angelics who were thrown out of heaven. That is consistent with the stories in other cultures as well. The point is, these entities, whoever they are, they're very powerful, very unique and powerful entities. And even when they came down here in their quote-unquote original forms, they were remarkably beautiful, remarkably incredible, and according to the biblical and other ancient text, interbred with human women and produced giants. Well, that wasn't a very good, productive program. And later they started doing what we refer to as transgenics. And for your audience, if you don't know what transgenics is, go to Google and type in the word transgenic and hit images, and you're going to get a nice quick. You're going to see mice is an example with a human ear on its head. That's a transgenic. That's what happens when you mix the two different types of DNA into one and produce something, some other parts of something else. Now, it has some medical basis. I understand all of that. But the fact is that transgenic is what the so-called alien really is. And he is nothing more than something else to interact. It's part of a deceptive program, in my view, because they've never told the truth to any of our so-called Native Americans or any races around the world. Every story and every culture is different of who they really are and where they really come from.
I don't know that they really say where they come from. They're just here.
Some of them, they told one of our abductees they come from the planet Banlon. Well, the planet Banlon's a deodorant. Some of them say they come from Zeta
You're not
Reticuli.
talking about myth. You're talking about the abductees are actually saying that.
Well, but that's because the so-called alien told them where they. Sometimes they ask them where they come from, and sometimes they'll tell them they're from a star system or from this place. And I'm not saying they haven't been there. I'm saying I doubt that they were from there simply because the fact that their DNA suggests that DNA was robbed from this planet and created in a transgenic process to interact with human beings. What are the chances of a 7-foot mantis being coming from another planet? None. Isn't it very curious that the same identical DNA is on this planet?
I don't really want to see a 7-foot mantis being.
Well, the examples of the Bigfoot is an example is in fact and provably so in court, forensically, provably is in fact a being that is not from this planet because it's not a great ape in any way, shape, or form, and that's been proven even on a court level. Jimmy Chilcott, a forensic expert in this, actually proved that. But the point is that it is a simian, and the simian DNA came from this planet. Every one of these entities. The Greys and the doctor type are referred to by the Navajo and various other tribes as the ant people. They're insectoids. It is highly likely that as you play with the DNA, if we get some of that DNA, and we think we already have some, and we're getting it looked at now, that in fact what we will find is that some of that DNA is in fact a transgenic, and number two, is from this planet itself.
What do you do with people that are self-proclaimed abductees? Have you found that they actually have had an abduction experience, or do you think that they just make it up? And under hypnosis, can you tell?
There are different ways that you can tell. Generally, when people come forward and start their own stuff and start their own little show, so to speak, I worry about people like that, about how much they made up, even if it's true. When they run out of soap, so to speak, after a while, they run out of story, they realize they need to write another book or something, they'll go out and manufacture it. I worry about people like that. I really do. But a good example of a lady came to me one time and claimed that she had been abducted by aliens, and I said, "How do you know that?" She said, "Well, I just have," and I said, "You haven't answered my question." How do you know that? And she said, well, it must have been true. And I said, that doesn't make fact. So when I finally did agree to work with her hypnotically, I found out that, in fact, it was not alien-related at all. The image that she didn't want to see was her brother, and it was sexual assault. She had to accuse the alien because she didn't want to deal with the fact it was actually her brother who sexually assaulted her.
Do you find in, your work with the UFO community and doing, the hypnotherapy work, that there are a lot of people that run around and say that they've been abducted when you just can tell that they're just big liars?
I can give you a case in point of a very famous case several years ago. The guy came to me, and this is a fun case to talk about, and it was public, so I'll talk about it publicly. Otherwise, I generally wouldn't give any names. They were referred to as the Gulf Breeze 6. These were people who worked for the six people who were the lowest end people in the Army Security, I think it's ASA, Army Security Agency, and they went AWOL, and the guy told me, he said, well, the reason they never prosecuted this is because we were all telling the truth. I said, no, the reason they didn't want to prosecute you is because they didn't want the word alien out there in the middle of their trial. So they thought you guys were nuts, and they just let you go. And anyway, a millionaire here in Houston had a big meeting, and he said, hey, Derrell, come on down and speak to some of my buddies and fellow investors. And I said, okay. And he said, and I'm inviting one of the Gulf Breeze 6 up here, the leader of the Gulf Breeze 6. And I said, I've been wanting to meet that guy for a long time. So I got up there, and the guy said, I gave my little spiel. I said, I look for physical evidence of those who allege human-alien contact, blah, 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 blah. I gave my little quick spiel and then sat down. And before I could sit down, this guy grabbed me, and one of the Gulf Breeze 6 guys, and he said, I understand that you know how to determine whether people lie or tell the truth. I said, you have no idea how effective I truly am. And he didn't get the hint. He says, well, that's just great. He said, because I've been telling the truth. And I said, really? And I said, well, is that your book? And he said, yeah. And I said, mind if I look at it? And he said, sure. And right in front, I did this in front of everybody, a whole room full of business people. And I go through his book, and he's listed about 69, 70 different types of aliens. And I said, the boo-boos? And I said, what really happened? And he said, what do you mean? I said, don't make me do what I do in front of everybody. I said, you can either fess up and tell the truth, or I'll just peel it out of you. And he admitted that he and David Morton and his crew got together with a Ouija board and sat down over a weekend and wrote the entire book. I said, thank you. I already know that. I said, you made all these alien types up, too. He said, yes, we did. I said, the boo-boos? I said, you at least make good names. This is really stupid. And he admitted the whole entire thing was a fake. Right.
How did you figure that out?
He
other than the
continued to be a big shot in the UFO community. He kept going to conferences speaking. People don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that.
How did you figure it out? It wasn't his handwriting because it was a book that was typed. You didn't hypnotize him. Other than the boo-boos, what made you have that conclusion?
Well, first of all, the fact that he said they had all these wonderful contacts still inside the Army Security Agency, and I said, that's not true. He said, what do you mean? I said, listen to me, buddy. I'm ex-intelligence. If I was filtering information from the CIA to this day to you, classified top-secret information, that's called a felony. I could be tried for a crime of treason. Why is it that you can get away with that and I can't? He said, what do you mean? I said, you're lying. If you're not lying, I said, I'll turn you into the Army Security Agency and we'll have a trial and see if you're not lying, I said, they'll find out where the leak is at and you're going to be tried and probably go to prison. Well, his face turned with that. as the reason your blush response is starting red, your face is red, is because you realize I got you. And I did. I said, there are certain things that are true in the intelligence community that I said, you're not being fed this information. This is not coming from them or some internal secret source about the alien. None of it's true. And, of course, physiology is 55% of all your communication. 38% is your tone, pitch, and timbre of voice. Only 7% is your words. So while he's saying the 7% words he claims is the truth, looking at his physiology, and I'm looking at his tone, pitch, and timbre of voice, seeing that 93% of that is not consistent with the 7% words. So what do you think I think? I'm going to go with Occam's razor. The bulk of the information of 93% is the truth. And that guy's lying through his teeth. And I got him to admit it in front of everybody. The multimillionaire was horrified. He spent thousands of dollars to fly this guy in and paid him all this money, thinking he was a big shot, only to find out that he lied through his teeth. I ruined the whole meeting.
I guess he hasn't done very many UFO shows
and
after
shortly
that
thereafter, he
point
did one more, I think, and then he quit because it got out. I just can't stand people like that. Just can't stand them.
Are there people that are and I kind of rag on these self-proclaimed people. I mean, I do the, intuitive work. I do a lot of metaphysical shows. So I have the people. This is one of my big ones. It's like, well, during my 12th past life in Atlantis, when I, on Tuesday, stopped at Starbucks and got a caramel frappuccino, with my best friend who's now my wife, I don't really have a lot of patience for that. And I would think you would have the same kind of situation happen to you with these people.
I'll give you a couple of funny examples of real cases. I was in 1991. I was at a Beckley conference in San Diego, and I had all my big stand there with alien implants and our research and stuff like that, and the medical and scientific stuff. And this lady walks up, a really pretty lady, and she's in kind of a really about a $400 muumuu type of dress. A really expensive, nice Hawaiian type dress. And she comes up there and stops and just kind of looks at me and goes, kind of takes a deep breath, and I think, okay. And she says, "You have astral implants." And I said, "Really? I use preparation H. I don't understand what the problem is." And boy, she got hot. She said, "That's not very funny." And I said, "I thought it was extremely funny." And I said, "So what are astral implants?" She said, "They're implants that cannot be detected or known by you," blah, 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 whatever. And I said, "Isn't that convenient? But you can detect them." She said, "That's right." And I said, "And you can remove them for the low, low price of?" She said, $50 a piece. I said, "How many do I have?" She said, 50. No, she said, "You have 10. And I said, "Okay, that's $500. I said, "Nice try." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I know several thousand abductees collectively all around the world." She said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, if I knew 1,000 abductees at $500 a piece, that'd be, what, $500,000? All I have to do is recommend you, right?" She said, "Well, that would be good." And I said, "Never going to happen, sweetie. Nice try." I said, "You're as big a fraud as anything I've ever seen in my life." And anyway, that ended that little conversation. But there are others that I'll often take my implants out, and I've got some fake implants in there too. Some of them we surgically remove, and then others that are just fake. And I'll have psychics come up all the time, and they'll go, ooh, or they'll do their breathing thing or whatever over it. This is so funny because this is really weird. This is so cool to me. They consistently choose the wrong implants. I don't mean once in a while. I mean they all choose the same fake implants as real. Every time. I've never seen anything. I can't even explain it. I don't know how to explain it. They all pick the exact same implants as the real implants.
That's interesting. I'm not quite sure what to think about that. I'm going to have to meditate on that because
maybe they're all getting the great information and it's all wrong, but they're getting it consistent. Look, whenever we question people, even on conscious levels, we use cognitive questioning techniques. We use a police approach. questions that have hallucinatory designs in them. We have questions that are entrapments. We have catches for persons and their alleged captors. We have questions that affect the alien and your memory of the alien. We have strategy elicitations that we do, meta programs that you run. We know how to interact with those. We use digital and analog questions. We use forensic-style techniques in our questioning. My point in all this, these are just some of the techniques we use. Even our questionnaires are laden with these sort of things. So when I'm watching you fill out a 20-page questionnaire, I'm watching your handwriting, I'm watching your physiology, listening to your tone, pitch, and timbre of voice, and listening to the 7% information, which is your actual explanation. I'm getting a ton of information.
And so you have a lot of information before you even start.
Most of the time, if I find people are lying or I find their stories not coherent, not truthful, I'll just generally pat them on the head and say, thank you for participating with our program, and that's all. We don't have time to handle your case and so on. I'll nicely let them go. But unless once in a while I'll find somebody who will want to fight about it. Well, why didn't you want my case? And then I say, well, what level do you want to carry that out on? And they'll say, well, just give me some examples. I said, well, first of all, your breathing, your facial expressions, your gestures, posture, the matching mirroring I did with you and everything told me that you were not being truthful. What do you mean? The tone, pitch, and timbre of your voice. It told me a lot. People that are auditory, and in which this person wasn't, they was kinesthetic individual. You're tactile in your response, and I said, so therefore I use other things to interact with you with, and they annoyed you, and you couldn't deal with it. If you were dealing with just the facts and the information, it wouldn't have made any difference, but it did.
But couldn't somebody that was just really scared?
We have scared people all the time, and scared people. Nothing wrong with that. There are people that get scared. They're horrified by their event. They don't even know why. Their body remembers, but their brain doesn't. That happens all the time. No problem with that. I have no problem with people being scared. Has nothing to do with it. It's the people who. Okay, if let's go back This is so easy to describe. Let me do this very, very gently for your audience here. If 55% of your communication is your physiology, 38, that's just your physical people looking at you, okay? And then the tone, pitch, and timbre of someone's voice is 38% of their communication, and only 7% is the words. And all of a sudden, you see this person sitting there calmly, without any problem, just had an alien experience, right? Either the greatest experience in the world or the worst, whatever it is. There's no change in their physiology whatsoever. The tone, pitch, and timbre of the voice doesn't change. The words are just like, and then, let me see, and then they told me to lay on this table, and then they told me to do this. Well, first of all, they're not even talking as the event occurs. They're dissociative in their discussion. And again, the 38% is missing, the 55% is missing. I have 7% words, and they're not even convincing. I'm not buying the story at all. If a person's afraid, there's a reason for that fear. It may be alien, may not be alien related. The point is something created the fear. If they got post-traumatic stress syndrome, something created that. You don't get PTSD because you wanted it or because you think you have it. You get it because of a horrific event, a car wreck, war, an alien abduction, or something else created that event. That creates the physiology. That creates the tone, pitch, and timbre in the voice. And then the 7%, you may not even know the event, what happened. That gives me huge hints that, in fact, you've had a real event of some kind.
With the people that have been abducted, have any ever provided any insights about why they're here? The aliens, that is.
Well, they lies all the time. They tell people things that are simply not true. The alien has lied consistently, and they continue to lie through abductees all the time. They will, for instance, I'll give you a perfect example. He came with her husband one night, and he had a big boom box and a recorder on it, and he was not real happy. he was waiting for me to make a mistake so he could sue me. I mean, I knew why he was there. And she wanted me to regress her because she wanted to prove to me that she had a positive, perfect, wonderful, and I told her, I said, young lady, I don't care whether you did or didn't. I don't have an axe to grind. Anyway, as soon as I hypnotized her, she kept screaming. This is really funny. It's called waking hypnosis. She's sitting there with her eyes open, and I'm talking to her, and she doesn't realize she's already in hypnosis. And she kept screaming, turn out that light, it's so bright in here. Well, the light was way down. Her husband's looking at me like, why is she saying that? Well, because she's not in this room in her event. She's in another room with a very bright light. And she kept screaming, leave my mother alone, oh my God, don't do that to her. She's screaming and screaming and screaming. What's even more horrific is there happened to be a young man besides her brother that was getting a horrific abduction experience there, none of which she remembers consciously. That's amazing. She does not remember the memory at all, but under hypnosis she remembers it perfectly. There was a third person in that room, and he drew a picture of this lady nude on the table with a 7-foot mantis being over her. Now that I'm sitting here with a picture of it right now on my PowerPoint presentation. That's the most amazing part about it. Is she doesn't remember any of this, but every bit of it's on her tape, which she didn't believe. She couldn't believe that. And there was a witness to the room, and he painted a picture of the mantis being and the bright light over the woman and the woman lying on this table. And she says to this day she had a wonderful positive experience in the School of Higher Consciousness, and none of those horrible things happened that we described. And what's amusing about it is her handwriting does not show that at all. That's what was hilarious.
Because it shows a lot of stress and PTSD.
And it shows a huge amount of self-deceit. Self-deceit in handwriting means something you don't want to face up to or won't face up to in your life. These are events, sometimes horrific event like your relative, your mom or dad, somebody you were very close to died and passed away, and you didn't deal with it well. It could be that. It doesn't make any difference what it is. It's something you don't want to deal with in life. In her case, in my view, it was, in fact, this event.
Derrell, we have a little less than 2 minutes. God, I had a question, and it flew out of my head. Oh, if these people have these events, by going through hypnosis and going back to the event, do they find relief?
Many of them do find relief. Some of them who are, in my opinion, are the contactees, these people who are led to believe that they, in effect, they buy into the screen memory, in other words. They were in the School of Higher Consciousness. They don't want to buy into the idea that some other entity did all kinds of things to them, and they don't want to deal with that. Most people are in that situation as contactees. Many of them don't want to deal with that aspect of it, and I don't have any problem with them not dealing with it. In fact, I tell them, if you don't want to really find out what went on and you don't want to really know, don't dig into this. If you can live without it, don't open Pandora's box. I can give you 100 cases where they opened Pandora's box and wish they hadn't. Because now they know the truth, and that the events, in fact, were quite different than than they're led to believe in that screensaver.
But they would never be able to let go of the body memory and whatever other repercussions that would have on their lives without knowing what happened and being able to process it.
That is very true. It stuck with you. You got to deal with it in some way or another now, and you can do that therapeutically. There are different ways of dealing with it, but the fact is, if you deal with it well and come to terms with it, it'll actually bless you when you finally figure out what the truth is, and you can get on with your life and realize, okay, I got hoodwinked, and now I know what the truth is of it, rather than, I want to go back to the School of Higher Consciousness, and so on, and I'll have to get my children next so they can have the same wonderful experience.
Yeah. Derrell, our time is up. The music's about to come up. If people want to get a hold of you, what is the best way?
The best way they can get hold of me is simply go to Operation Alien DNA, operationaliendna.com. That's operationaliendna.com, and just click on the Alien Hunter there, and it'll email me, and you can ask any questions you want. I answer all my emails, and I'm a little slow sometimes, but I will get your email, and I will answer your questions.
Cool. And you have some books. I'm waiting for the music. So your books, are they available on the website?
They are available on the website, and they are, in my opinion, some of the best things out there. Some people have written some wonderful things about them simply because the books are very definitive in their...
Cool.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we're going to go, but I just want to mention to the listeners, you know, you've been on before, and so we've talked about some of the other alien stuff, UFO stuff, so check out those interviews as well. Derrell, thank you very much for coming on the show. Always a pleasure having you on, and I will talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, bye. That's Derrell Sims. The webpage I have is alienhunter.com. Next week we have Alan Cohen and Shefali Sasquatch. Let's see, we're talking about how good can it get and conscious parenting. So until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita.